So I just want to give some credit to Eric Mazur for reflecting and thinking about his teaching and not having it just be about students successfully completing the course, but what did they really understand? Because he's certainly in a position of privilege where he's a successful instructor at Harvard. He's got these startups and different companies and ventures. He didn't necessarily need to do all that to be successful in his field, but he certainly took it upon himself to do that really well. So the peer instruction process, we'll kind of do a skim across all of these steps, but then we'll get into some of these individual elements fairly soon. So as the instructor, you introduce that concept, and that could be through, let's say, a mini lecture. Maybe it's 15 minutes, hopefully, or less, where you're going to introduce that concept. And then related to that, you're going to pose a question to students, some sort of meaty questions or a critical element that you want them to focus on. You give them time to reflect and think about that, what's been presented and what that question is. And then you have them record their answers or take notes. There may not just be an answer, but it may be thoughts and reflections that you want them to capture. Maybe it's taking a position on something. And then you have them convince their neighbor through some sort of dialogue. And one neighbor would talk to the other, and then they would switch. They would compare positions or answers, and they would come up with some sort of consensus. And then there's a revision of your answers based on that dialogue. And then there's some sort of explaining that correct answer, which could be across the whole group. Some students might be selected to explain it to others, because to be able to explain a concept, you have to know it more deeply than just answering a question on an exam. So this is really propped up to take that dialogue to deeper understanding, which is where you get that stickiness with learning that's going to take them to the next steps, whether it be in that course or the next course or beyond into the field. So that's the peer instruction process at a glance there. And then how do we know it works? We've actually got some good research that's taken place, and some of the findings that you can see here related to retention of knowledge being greater, increased conceptual understanding and problem solving, particularly in STEM and quantitative settings. Increased student engagement. We always want more of that. They're more comfortable asking their peers. That's another important thing about peer learning is students aren't necessarily going to ask you questions when they're struggling with something. They don't want to be seen as not being intelligent, so they don't want to put themselves in that position, but with a peer, they're more comfortable. And then we see also increased course satisfaction and retention. What I want to take a further look at and see whether the research is at this point doing it is seeing how this might be also closing equity gaps. So I know that's happening in other areas of research, but I want to look particularly related to the peer instruction model and dig deeper on how that's closing equity gaps. My sense through all of these things is it is, and I've done that work myself in other areas and can see similarities. And feel free, if you know of other research or methods related to that or other outcomes, feel free to add those in there as well. So now let's get into some of these techniques, and feel free to share whether you've done one of these before. Have you done it the way that I'll be describing, or have you done it a little bit differently? Because there are different ways of doing a fishbowl technique, and I'll kind of describe those. And some of these other ones, I'll give you some variations. Also at the end, I'll let you know that we do have some handouts and templates for some of these that we'll share with you. We also will share the slides and the recording, so don't worry about having to take any of this down necessarily, unless that's helpful for you. So with the fishbowl, generally what you can do with that is you might pick 2 to 5 students. They're given a topic and they're given time to gather their thoughts, and then they're going to participate in a lively discussion or debate of opposing views. So those are the ones that are actually inside the fishbowl, those 2 to 5 students that are debating or discussing that topic. Outside the bowl, you're going to have other students, usually a similar number, who are observing and looking at and reflecting on the arguments that are being made by the students. They can verify things if they want to. So the people that are outside the bowl, you might have one playing the role of the fact checker. They might be actually online and looking up some of the things that the students are suggesting or finding a resource related to it. And then also the ones that are outside of the fishbowl that are listening are polling students as to who made the best case or which side won. So you have the students involved that are in the mix in the fishbowl, the others that are observing. And then what you can do after that is you can have a debrief, and you can have those that were observing kind of share, um, a summary of their experience and what they saw as the main points that were made. And if you wanted to, you can even say who was more successful in the debate for their particular point. And then you can come up with kind of the lessons learned from that moment or opportunity. Some people will do this, and as I talk about these, I'll try and remember to talk about how you can do these in synchronous online modes, asynchronous types of activities, or do this in the class, and hopefully you'll see the transferability between all of those, but feel free to ask that as well. This is something that you could easily do with breakout rooms. Some people, when they do a fishbowl, they'll have two students, let's say, in front of the whole class. I tend to not like to have it that way, where it's two students who are on spotlight by, let's say, 50 other students. That's a lot. Instead, I could do breakout rooms of 10 and assign 2 to 5 students to be the in fishbowl, and then the other ones to be the observers, and then have them do an exchange afterwards just within their breakout room. And then you can bring them all back after the time has elapsed, and then you can do a debrief across the whole group. So different ways where you can do that according to class size and whether you're doing live synchronous sessions that are online. This is one that's pretty popular, but I'm still surprised the number of people I come across who haven't done a Think, Pair, Share before. How many of you who are here today have done a Think, Pair, Share, or have worked with others to implement Think, Pair, Share? Because I know some of you are not currently instructors. You might be center directors, or you might be instructional designers, learning designers. How many of you have done Think, Pair, Share? See Chris, hands up nodding. You want to jump on real quick? Or just the affirmative, is that good?
Yeah, no, I mean, I use it. I came from the K-12 setting, and that was a popular thing in, especially elementary school and middle school. But it works really super well with adults. I've even used it with our faculty here.
Great. Yeah, and that's a good point. I mean, some of the things we're talking about with peer learning have come from the K through 12 settings, absolutely. And many of them are applicable to adult learning. You can make some minor modifications, in some cases not even have to make modifications. It's really just context specific. So these are easily adaptable. And I'm just going to be sharing a handful of them that we'll talk about today. So Think, Pair, Share, if you haven't already done it before, this is something that is really easy to implement. It's easily scalable. You can do it in your pairs, and you can do it across your whole group. We're actually going to do that in a little bit later in this session. It'll be a brief one, so don't worry if that's not your favorite thing to do breakout discussions. We're going to just model a brief scenario in just a little while. So with Think, Pair, Share, pretty easy to think about what that might mean, but let's go through the steps very briefly here. So what you're going to do is, again, prop up a question to students or a problem, either way. And then you have the students individually spend time to think or reflect. And typically they'll be taking notes. And some people even call this write, pair, share, but Think, Pair, Share is the one that I go with. And writing is usually part of their reflection process. They'll make some notes, because then you're going to get them into pairs where they're going to actually discuss with each other and compare notes. They're not necessarily doing the debating and nobody else is watching. It's just the two of them. So it's different than the fishbowl for sure. And then they're going to have that dialogue. And then what you're going to do is you're going to bring students back into the whole group. And then you're going to do some sharing out of what was discussed across the groups. And you're not going to have every person respond, particularly if you have a large group, but you're going to just try and grab on to the highlights of what was discussed. As an instructor, if you wanted to, you could even be live, kind of capturing those notes onto a blank slide if you wanted to. The sharing out, you can also do what some people call Think, Pair, Square, where they'll have them do their individual reflection and prepare, then go into their pair discussions. And then instead of bringing the whole group back together, they'll then put them into paired pairs groups. So they'll have a group of 4 now, or a square. So that's a way where you can still keep it kind of a smaller group discussion to do some of the comparisons and dialogue there. So a couple different ranges that you can think about based on your modality or based on number of students you have or how you might want to run that. Easy to do with breakout rooms for Think, Pair, Share. Let's see, right now we've got 17 people. If I wanted you in Think, Pair, Share, then I would do 9 rooms, because then you would have 2 per room. Actually, that would leave somebody by themselves. I would do 8 rooms, and 1 room would have a 3rd person. Okay, so that's how you do that in Zoom pretty easily. All right. So let me know. Let's see. Sandy's mentioning she's been doing Think, Pair, Share in the Reading Apprentice program. Great. It applies to any context, absolutely whatsoever. Very easy to do. Okay, let's talk about practice exams as another opportunity for peer learning. And you might say modeling as well is what you can do there through this practice process. So with practice exams, as I describe it, I want you to think that the purpose of this is not to prepare them to be better exam takers, but it's to give them a practice experience and then to reflect upon how well they did with that practice experience, discuss their results with a partner, and then think about the errors that they made, the misunderstandings they may have had, and then how to change that understanding going forward to the real exam. So it's not meant to be done for preparing them to take better multiple choice type exams. It's for different types of questions and problems on an exam. They eventually retake it. The instructor can explain the answers and provide clarification for any areas of confusion, particularly if across the group you find a strong pattern of confusion or students getting an answer incorrectly. If you have a strong pattern, then definitely as an instructor, that's something you have to really own up and then come back to the students and go through that content again, provide further clarification, provide other examples or resources that can help them with better understanding. So it's a good check for the students, but also a good check for understanding across the group for the instructor. So that's one example there with practice exams. I want to talk briefly about peer-created content. This is something that I have found to be really powerful. And so this is where it's peer learning, but it isn't within a contained 5, 10, 15-minute period that's an activity like Think, Pair, Share or Fishbowl or anything like that. It's where you're having students in a more sustained peer learning environment. It's a bit more project-based, but it doesn't have to be a full-scale, high-stakes, course-long project. It can be more iterative, and it can be something that's more scaffolding that's going to build to a final product. So let me just give you a few examples of what I mean there. So you might have students working together in groups to prepare a wiki on a particular project. They might create annotated bibliographies. They might even create a manual, depending on what the topic is. So this is how they would come up with or demonstrate that they've learned the content, but also they're demonstrating how they're learning the application of it, and also how they're demonstrating how they could teach it or explain it to others. So you're taking them to that much higher level of thinking. They might use something like the glossary tool in Moodle to develop a glossary across the course as different topics come up and new words are learned. Then they're now submitting those as part of a crowdsourced glossary for the course. Some people have used the book tool. There are different plugins that you could use with different learning management systems. You might have student created case studies. As instructors, we try at times to provide case studies for students to examine. So we've already developed them and we have them study those cases, but this is where you can actually have students go out and create case studies, excuse me. And this is where they might take your particular topic and look at something in their community. You know, it could be COVID related, it could be effective COVID on socioeconomics and you know, interviewing small business owners or families and how they're impacted, different things like that in developing case studies. Yeah, which wiki tool are we using? Yeah, let's see. I know at one time I was using PBWiki. That was a really popular one because it's supposed to be as easy as making a peanut butter and jelly sandwich. That was a really popular one. I know in some learning management systems, you can have a wiki plugin that you can use. Any other ones that people can think of out of there as far as other wiki tools? I'm just leaning back on PBWiki. Yeah, so the built-in LMS wikis, they may not always be the best, but I also find whenever possible, I try and do what I can with the learning management system because it's nice to have students only have to think about one portal, if you will, and one set of tools. So if we can all be in one environment, that's great. And then also the learning management systems tend to be accessible, 508 compliant, tend to be, as far as their structure and the tools that are there. So that's also another reason why you might use the learning management system for wikis and other things like this. And then the last thing is having students maintain a blog or a podcast or a vlog, if you will, a video blog. That's something they can do. And that could be something that's just sort of a weekly post that they're doing together. And then that builds across the topic that they're exploring throughout the course. So those have been some exciting things that people have done as peer learning experiences. And I've been following the research that when students get involved in these types of self-constructed and co-constructed multimedia, multi-format types of experiences and products, the level of learning that takes place and the retention is at a very high level. And they become extremely engaged because this is something that they have ownership of, and they're really taking agency through that process. So that's a really another exciting aspect about it. Sorry, pardon me for a moment. I'm used to Carrie doing half the talking. I'm drying up here. Okay, so let's move on to a little bit more on our active learning here. So I'm going to prop us up for a think, pair, share activity. This will be fairly brief, but we'll want to walk through the process and also use it for the purpose of this experience and doing a little bit of peer learning here, because I know the 17 of you that are here have so much experience and expertise to bring to this conversation that it's not about what I have to share entirely. It's really about what can we share with each other. So the think part is, what is an outcome of your course for which students would highly benefit from peer learning? Now, if you're not directly an instructor of a course, think about somebody who you've worked with, or think about an instructor that comes to mind and how this would apply to them. And then once I pair you up and put you out into your rooms, describe to your partner how you would use a peer learning technique to improve engagement and learning. Could be one that was mentioned already, could be other ones that you can think of. We'll come back after a few minutes from that. That'd be a pretty brief sharing because this is pretty focused and we want to keep us moving on. And then we'll have you actually share out some of the things that you discussed, and we'll put all those into a Padlet. And that's another example of how you can do a share. And the reason I want to use a Padlet is because then these become stuck to the Padlet wall, and it's a resource that you can then follow up with if you wanted to later by going back to this. So we crowdsource some ideas, we put them onto a Padlet, and you'll be able to go back to that URL, which we'll share with you, as opposed to if it just goes into the chat or just verbally, then it can be gone after this session ends. Okay, so Molly's setting it up for breakout. We're going to be in pairs. Your question is going to be, what is an outcome? And I'm going to go ahead and, oops, that's way too far on the slides here. Sorry, if some of you are using an Apple mouse and doing Google Slides, you know that it can be problematic at times. So let me get us back to where we were here with think, pair, share, because I wanted to just paste a couple things into the chat. So this will be your prompt. Because this screen will go away from you. And then when you come back, you'll have the URL. Okay, so what's an outcome of your course for which students would highly benefit from peer learning? Okay, Molly, so let's go ahead and put everybody out into the breakout rooms, and let's do that for 4 minutes. And you'll have a countdown timer of one minute warning. Okay, now if you'll jump to the link that's in the chat, and I'll do so on the screen here, and that way you can see what's compiling live. So just name and describe an example of peer learning that you discussed within your group, but also feel free to put other ones on here. Try and populate this so it becomes a resource across the group. And if we have redundancy, that'll be easy. I could always clean that up later, but just feel free to keep adding things on here. Ooh, collaborative quizzes, great. Give us a little bit of context about how that would work.
Hey, Brett, did you want your Padlet
Yes.
to show on your screen for everybody to see?
I did, okay, for some reason it's not. Let me reshare. I thought it would automatically stay that way. Thank you for bringing that to my attention. How's that?
Perfect.
Thank you. Okay, think, pair, shares come up a couple times. Yeah, that's a really popular one. Easy to implement, but effective. Collaborative quizzes. Are these students in the collaborative quizzes maybe co-creating those as study opportunities? Are they sharing those? Is it a pair of students creating those, a group of students, or is it across the course centrally that they're creating these? Is it a Google Doc? How are those exam types created and then put into the quiz format? So I'd love to learn more about those collaborative quizzes. I think pair share for getting students comfortable talking about a text. Yeah, that's good. That's it. Again, that's a safe space, students talking to each other. It's more relatable. There's less fear of not having something perfect. Okay, we've got some case study information. Awesome. And I'll be curious to see, are those created case studies given to the students, or are you giving them a framework to create their own case studies as a process? Yeah, I'm seeing students speak each other's language. And that's a good thing to remember for instructors. You have this high level, deep expertise in a particular area. You've got your doctorate in many cases. You're doing high level research and all these great things. But as you stand in front of students, you can't really talk at that level because it's not necessarily going to transfer the knowledge that you want to happen. And not all those students want to be you. They're not all trying to be you and have the same type of outcome. So how can you make it more relatable to them? How can you make it more applicable to their goals? Students can do that pretty automatic. Okay, what else? Yeah, so having these conversations as a process, helping students to conceptualize knowledge and then relating it to the real world. Yeah, that's our ideal, is how can they take it beyond the course? Again, outside of the course and beyond the course is our ultimate goal, not just helping them get an A. And is there anything that anybody wanted to share by coming on to audio? Feel free, this is an open format. I know sometimes it's easier to share that way, and you may have.
I'll ask a question if you don't mind.
Oh yes, Deb, please.
It's Debs, and sorry, I'm in a kind of dark room today. I got the short straw for where I would do my Zoom today.
Love it. Love it.
Yeah. I was talking to, I'm so sorry, I forgot her name already. Pam. I ended up in a breakout room that didn't have anybody. So I came back to the main room. Pam was nice enough to chat with me. And I was telling her that I've used think, pair, share a lot, but a lot of times when I do it, my students just agree with each other, even if I think the question should prompt discussion. So can anybody give me tips on how to, am I not wording the question right? Do I not have enough? Is the content too, I don't know, similar? Anybody have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, let's pause and see if anybody, again, if you want to go open mic or if you want to contribute in chat, feel free.
I want to note
Anything?
that Deb works with occupational therapy for mental illness. So we wondered if that subject area might have been one of the reasons why.
I'm not sure anybody
okay.
wants to be confrontational about mental health. So I teach them the concept of mental health and how occupational therapists, we work with that. And I do 2 semesters of it. And a lot of times I pair them up and say, but it'll be something like, what do you think an OT does in mental health? Or what are some of the things we can do? And instead of kind of expanding, that somebody will go, well, we can help somebody with ADHD, and the person that they're paired with will go, yeah, that's really good. And then it just kind of stops. I don't know if they feel like they get one and yay, Deb's going to say yes, or if it's just, is it controversial, or are they just looking for me to nod at them and say, good job?
Yeah, I wonder. Yeah, touchy subject maybe. I see Sandy's point. Yeah, I wonder, and I've heard so little, Deb, but I'm just trying to think. My thoughts are, I wonder if they're focusing too much on the clinical procedural and just getting that down, or could the prompt be something broader that, how are we failing individuals in relation to mental health and wellness, or supporting mental health? Could it be broader?
Yeah, that's what I said to Pam, is I might need to make it a little bit more controversial.
Yeah,
To really get some dialogue going, rather than, I think I might focus on the actual course content too much. And they kind of feel siloed into one answer.
okay. Yeah, and it could be, here are different types of mental health programs. It could be based on region, country, whatever it may be, but maybe having them compare, and why are some seen as more successful and others not. So yeah, I think maybe trying to get them off of that clinical procedural, getting to the right answer track might be part of it. Chris, you popped up. What's up?
Yeah, I just had another thought that I've had students explain to me, that they like to think, pair, share because they feel like they can be heard in class. And if you have a large class, often they don't get to talk. Yeah, so I think that's another benefit, is everybody gets heard.
Great, thank you so much. Yeah, and there isn't time sometimes for everybody to be heard, but also some students aren't going to want to speak up live in front of the whole group. Again, they don't want to be ostracized or shot down if they don't say the right thing. It may be seen as awkward for them. So having those smaller conversations, it's much more safe and relatable for some students. Absolutely. Great. Other thoughts about peer learning ideas? We did this session on sort of 4 ways, but there are almost an unlimited number of ways that you can do these. We'll send you some follow-up templates of a few examples, but we have dozens that we use in different ways. We have some sort of common popular ones that work well, but we have a lot of others that we kind of keep in our toolbox. So we'll share out a bunch of those as well. Okay, let me go back to the slide, and I'm just going to it'll go to full screen here. So let's talk about some of the takeaway resources. As I mentioned earlier, the session slides and recording will get to you automatically. We'll send that out within the next few days, and then also we'll send a couple of these sample peer learning templates. And what I mean by templates is these are documents that are set up and structured for you to be able to build or implement one of these types of experiences. If it's how to have students do a podcast, then there's a guiding document there for students to be able to do that, but there's certain areas for you to be able to fill in the context and edit some of that. And so we have that in gray text, and then we have the black text, which tends to be more used universally. But it is an editable template that you can use to adapt some of these things for group projects and collaborative type experiences, co-creating resources, things like that. We have another template that we'll share with you. So those are some of the takeaway resources that we have for you from this session. Any other questions or comments that you have based on today's topic? Again, I'm used to seeing Carrie on this slide as well. I feel so lonely. Again, I'm making sure that I pause adequately here. I know it's a tendency for people to wait half a second and then just move on automatically. So let me check the chat to see if anything's come up there. Great, thanks, Deb. All right, well, you have my contact information there if anything comes up. If you do Twitter, then I'd love to connect with you there as well. Let me just share one other opportunity that we do have. So we're developing this purposeful learning platform. And so with Nectar, that we're calling it, this design platform, we're actually creating that so that there are these micro learning experiences that would be available for people on different topics. So you can go in and look at a particular topic. Let's say it's related to peer learning. Then we would have these micro learning modules on peer learning and how to implement that effectively, and then have the resources bundled there for you. So it's meant to be chunkable and interactive the way you would want things for students, and have the actual resources there. It's not heavily text-based. It tends to have multimedia and resources bundled together and kind of get you through a topic and to some resources and solutions that you can then implement. So it's very practical. And so we'll have a community of practice through that for those that participating using these resources, even contributing some resources. And we're actually looking for folks that might be interested in being part of the design panel for this platform. And so we're looking for, any of you that want to put your hand in there, put your hat in there, I should say, into the chat, feel free, and we can follow up with you and talk about that process and being part of this design panel that helps to develop this. And this will be something that, will be open access, that people can use a lot of these resources, for their instruction, or if you are a learning designer or instructional technologist, these are tools that you would be able to use as you're helping others design or refine their courses. Okay, so that next webinar, we'll talk about Propel, which is one of our solutions for driving learner success through what we call purposeful instructor support. So much as what we do is about our purposeful learning framework that some of you have heard us talk about before, and we use that actually to guide the support that we give to instructors to make what they do more effective. And we'll be doing that 2 weeks from today, same time, and the URL there is in the chat already, perfect. And we'll send you a reminder as well, just to be safe. All right, well, thank you everybody for attending today, and I'll look on to the chat for a couple minutes just in case there are any other questions or comments you might want to do one-on-one. I'll be here. Thank you.